there's real value in adopting rules, at least in a skeleton sense, while you're still small. And it's really about vocabulary, of agreeing on some basics. One of the things that comes up all the time as a moral question, as a finance question, as a leadership question is, what should people get paid? And with only a little bit of tongue in cheek, you have this delicate balancing act. You want to attract great people. You're often hiring people you know well and have a long-term relationship with, but you also want to make sure that the company is running as lean as possible. So in a sense, people should get paid as little cash as possible, as long as you're getting the perfect people. That getting the right people is so important. But, some people say, well, my life would be most comfortable if I got the same cash compensation as I was getting working for my big company. And that's often impractical. And it's often not necessary that you can emphasize the other things, most importantly, the stock, but also the experience, the freedom, the opportunity to be part of something world changing is a piece of what motivates people. And the cash plus stock plus experience plus freedom can add up to something really substantial, even if the current cash compensation isn't what they would currently be getting. I think the core challenge is that different people have different needs based on their life situation. They may say, you know what, I have, a big mortgage and, 3 kids in private school. I have a certain amount of cash need that I can't live without this. And you have to then make a decision. How do you handle the fact that some people may need a lot more cash than others? Now, sometimes you can do this by just making the total value, in some sense, with stock more equitable across the organization. But you're going to have to find a way to deal with this diversity of life situation, because some people may be quite willing to take pretty skinny salaries to be part of a founding team. But they do have an expectation that the long-term return in terms of stock experience and freedom will be all the better because they have made a short-term sacrifice. To me, it's important to keep it simple. Do give people vacation. Burnout is a really big issue in startup companies. Do give them the basic health insurance. Don't think about bonus plans and car allowances. You don't have to think up front about 401ks. That's something that you sometimes will have to do retroactively. We did have to do it retroactively at Babel Labs. You don't have a stock purchase plan. Everybody's got a sizable stock option. The one bonus exception, to my mind, is sales compensation. Not for sales leadership so much, but for at the time when you have bag-carrying salespeople who have always operated in a culture where they get rewarded for the deals they bring in. I think it makes sense. In fact, I think it makes sense to have that with strong accelerators where if they exceed their plan, they make a lot of money. It reflects part of this, quote, performance-driven culture that I talked about earlier, but it also is a way of encouraging people to push to close the biggest deal with the most cash collection possible. As you get down the road a few years, you had some initial stock grants or stock options that are vesting, and you have to think about what happens as that vesting nears completion, because the expiration or the completion of vesting on a stock option is otherwise a milestone event which invites people to check out their other options. You don't want to be in a position where someone is fully vested, because you probably were counting on that stock being an important part of your retention plan. And so you need to be thinking out as much as 2 years before the vesting is complete and start to think about how you layer on more options so that they're going to be around for another uh, 4 years, say, from the point at which you grant those options. And so somewhere in the year to year and a half from completion of vesting, I think it makes sense to to do those things. In the early stock handling, you really are offering stock purchase rather than options uh, uh, for their benefit. In the early days, the where the company has very little revenue, the prospects are very abstract and far in the future for when it's going to be the company's going to be sold or go public. The common shares, which have no liquidation preference, are not worth very much on the open market. You know, you don't, they don't have any place in line to collect cash that was raised by the company. And so the stock is, from a sales standpoint, pretty worthless. And that's captured in the current purchase price for the stock. And so you can have the option of not giving an option for the early employees to purchase shares when they like. You just offer it to them now, and they're paying a penny or a tenth of a penny or a hundredth of a penny per share, so that even a large stock option can be purchased up front. You might say, okay, here's 1 million shares, but I'm pricing them at a tenth of a penny a share. So you can spend $1,000 and buy 1 million shares in this company. And the key is, from a tax perspective, that starts the clock on the time holding requirements that distinguish long-term capital gains from short-term capital gains. But you have to also make sure that they file in the US a Section 83B registration, which says, I'm willing to pay the taxes now, which are essentially nothing, rather than waiting to pay later on the tax obligations. So I want to be taxed on the associated with the value of the shares now, rather than be taxed on short-term capital gains at the time that the stock becomes liquid. I'm oversimplifying this a little bit, but do offer stock purchase to the very early people when the strike price, the assumed common share price, is very low, and ensure and help them file their 83B. Sometimes people forget to do this, and they suddenly find themselves owing tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars at the time that the company stock becomes liquid. That's a bad thing. You really want to help them out. Budget. This is maybe the most important pattern of behavior that you want to establish early, is get every person in the team to be thinking about the future. What is their future need for people, for headcount? And what are you going to need to pay them? Not just their cash salaries, but don't forget about taxes and benefits and health insurance and all that. What is the product going to cost to build? What is going to be the cost of that product in COGS, cost of goods sold at the time, including things like royalties you owe, pass-through software, commissions and distribution costs. And what are your other operating costs? Are you paying rent? Are you running trade shows? Are you buying software? And figure out what's the right amount of cushion you need so that you are not always in fundraising mode. Remember, you only want to fundraise when you reach milestones and when you have some visibility to what is the next major milestone, and you're raising enough money to carry you from one major inflection point to the next. And therefore, you need to know at any point in time, are you still on that path? And do you need to do something about it? You may say, gosh, I'm not developing the product fast enough and I need to add more headcount. On the other hand, you may be saying, gosh, I'm going through the cash faster than I thought. I have to moderate my headcount growth. Or in the worst case, I have to cut my headcount in order to make the cash last until I meet those milestones. And it does lead to the most anxious of trade-offs, which is, of course, yeah, you can freeze headcount or cut headcount to save cash, but will you actually be able to deliver the product that you need to get to the next milestone? And so thinking through this, thinking carefully about the core product development capabilities that you need, and do you know what R&D resources or product or selling or marketing resources you need to get there, so that you don't get too fat, you don't get ahead of your headlights. So, in a sense, there are some very simple takeaways from this. I think there is a pretty basic but essential level of financial literacy that founders need to have, that founders need to understand the cash flows in the business that they have designed. And if it isn't working, then they either need to redesign that or they need to figure out what the leverage point is in costs or in fundraising or in product price in order to make the numbers add up. Burn rate, AKA runway, is clearly the most essential thing. And as a startup CEO, I thought about this no more than about 5 times a day. And therefore budgeting early and often, getting the rest of the team, getting the head of engineering, getting the marketing people, getting the sales people involved in budgeting is really important. And developing a sense of when you're hearing realistic estimates or when you're hearing wishful thinking is really important to making judgments on these things. There are a handful of places where you have to think about legal compliance. There are not many, but those that are there can be silent killers. You need to be at least aware of these. These may be things you only think about once a week. Good governance develops good habits. Habits of transparency. That's transparency within the organization, so everybody knows sort of what the assumptions are, and transparency with investors so that they build trust that what you say does reflect reality. It also fosters efficiency because you get those critical discussions about topics like, why are we spending money on this trade show, but not hiring this engineer? Or why are we hiring so many engineers for the second generation product when we still haven't figured out how we're going to make the first generation product meet its necessary revenue goals? So that conversation, which is really about fundamentals of the business, is often couched in terms of financial characteristics, especially cash characteristics.